Recording in progress.
Hello everyone. So this is the last session. My words may be a little slurred as I've had already one Aperol and I'm on my second. The reason being I'm going to Venice in a week's time. So this is a prelude to what will happen in Venice, especially as we bring the kids and we try to experience art with them for the first time. I've been going to Venice for I don't know how many years now. I think I started back in 2008 or so, whenever, around that time. And I don't think I've missed one yet. Maybe missed one at the birth of one of our kids, but generally speaking, we've been there, my wife and I, every 2 years. So we're in the session that concerns critique. And it's really difficult to make critique exciting or fun and it can be fun, but explaining it away is the best way of taking the fun out of it or exercising the fun from it. I'm going to put up a clip here of Susan Sontag, and it's from a documentary about Susan Sontag that came out, I don't know when, but it's a clip in which she says, here's the clip.
For the last 100 years in our society, the most interesting writers have mostly been critics of the society. I like that position. I like the position of being able to express dissenting opinions.
And I think taking the dissenting position is what criticism is. It's looking at the art world holistically and then seeing an entry point into the consensus around art, because there is a lot of consensus around art and the art scene, and I think there has to be, especially if the art scene is small. But it doesn't really matter where the art scene is. Peter Sheldall said that living in New York meant that you could lose a friend a day by being an art critic. And that's true. But being an art critic in Ireland is a very different prospect. When you lose a friend, you lose a whole group of friends, because everyone has to group together in a collective and supportive manner, because the fragility of the artist, not just psychologically, but culturally, especially in a space in which resources, albeit good in terms of public funding, it's still tight. It always is. And public funding really goes to the production of art. It's never for the survival or the life world of the artist. So being a critic, especially when I started off as an artist and a critic at the same time, so I was an exhibiting artist, and then I decided to found Billion Journal, which I've talked about in the introduction, and it was really strange and exciting to write about my peers and also the artists that were more established than me at the time, because I was, for lack of a better term, an emerging artist. And to write about the established few and the poor many was interesting, and also to write about graduates in the degree shows, when degree shows were less professionalized, was really exciting, because there was an objection in colleges that wasn't practiced or performed in the art scene proper, in commercial galleries or in publicly funded spaces like Temple Bar, etc. The only space that was doing radical art, especially in the early days, was Mother's Tank Station. And you see the roster of artists that they had in the beginning and how that changed over time, especially in the leaning towards representational painting of a kind of naive or quirky sensibility, which is really what they're doing now. Of course, they have really interesting artists still, but yeah. So painting is in. So art that kind of tests the boundaries of language, of visual language, of sensory language, as Susan Sontag may have it. You don't see so much of now. But that could be just nostalgia talking. Our criticism, who are the influences? Well, there's this writer, you may have heard of her, Renata Adler. She wrote this piece, I don't know what year it was, I'd say it was, let me just check the back of this. 1980. In the New York Review of Books. She was chief art critic, I think, for the New York Times at the time. And she wrote this polemic. It was originally titled The Perils of Pauline. And Pauline was Pauline Kael, who was a film critic. And she became massive in the late 1970s, early 80s. And really similar to Roberta Smith in the New York Times. She had this reputation, and to be reviewed by her was very important at the time, when critics not only had a voice, but they also had the power to convince. And Renata Adler wrote a polemic on her 5,000-word piece. I think it was commissioned by the New Yorker, and there was lots of rumours about it, but I remember hearing a story, an anecdote that involved Gary, Indiana, and Susan Sontag in a coffee shop, and they have the New Yorker in their hand and they're reading the piece by Renata Adler. She's a formidable character here. See the image of her. And she was very young at the time. She's in her 20s. And then she's taking down this powerhouse, Pauline Kael, who has all the reputation. And coming from Gary, Indiana, whom I have a book here also. I think this was published, I don't know if it was published posthumously after Gary Indiana's death, but it's around that time. It's called Fire Season, and it's his collected writings from 84 to 2021. Brilliant writer. And then Susan Sontag, whom I've brought up many times during these sessions. And there's a story about them in the coffee shop laughing out loud of what Renata Adler has done, which is really brutal. She's went through the back catalogue of Pauline Kael, and she's dug up extracts and how her style has changed, especially as her reputation grew. But Adler basically was ostracized after the piece, and there's lots of stories about it was personal, but I don't think it was. I think it was an ambitious critic looking at this critic that had all this sway over the New York cultural landscape. Anything she said goes or stays, and I think it was just a takedown, really. This is what critics do. If critics agree, one or both become irrelevant. That's a Dave Hickey quote. And I have a Dave Hickey book here as well, called Pirates and Farmers. And this is a lovely book. Maybe that's the wrong word. But why it's called Pirates and Farmers it's a definition of two different types of artists. The farmers being artists that cultivate a kind of practice that is habitual, that is perennial, that doesn't really change, and it creates a legacy. They are legacy artists. They are ploughing the land seasonally. They're showing seasonally. They are, they're here for the long haul. And then pirates are something different. They are ones that disrupt. They're radicals. They take risks, but they burn out quickly. They don't hang on. They do the job of destruction or deconstruction, and then they get out or are pushed out. I think Andy Warhol, whom Dave Hickey is a big fan of, is both, depending on where he is in his career. After he was shot, he becomes a farmer. But before he got shot in the factory, he was a pirate, which comes with risks. But he survived it and then became a farmer. I think, now I'm paraphrasing, but I'm not saying that he said that, but this is the gist I get from it. Of course, Christopher Hitchens, and I love the naming of these books. And yet, Hitchens always proposes, like describes, whether a novel's motivations or ambitions, and yet we can look at it this way. Also, his collection, arguably a tome, brilliant. There's other writers as well. This is one I spoke about earlier, Donald Cuspit, The New Subjectivism. Christian Vivicerus Fauné. He was a co-curator of Dublin Contemporary, but he also wrote for The Village Voice, who spawned Roberta Smith, Gary Indiana, Jerry Saltz, all these critics. So The Village Voice, brilliant. This guy, really snappy prose, very critical, big influence. Craig Owens, he talks about the frame of art, but he also was a feminist. This was edited by Barbara Kruger and others whom Owens supported during their time, especially female artists like Cindy Sherman, etc. And another Christopher Hitchens, really nice little book, first edition, Letters to a Young Contrarian. My voice is starting to go. Janet Malcolm writes for The New Yorker, really beautiful writer. Nobody's Looking at You essays. She also has this book called 50 False Starts, which is very good also. And yeah, listen, there's so many. But criticism is something that I adopted because I felt it was orphaned in some way. And it really does mean writing against the grain, taking the dissenting position, as Sontag has it. And there's something exciting about that. If you can take the rebuttals, they're usually private, they're usually emails or direct messages that no one can see. I've never shared these, but I've had messages from curators, not so much artists, but really institutions who find my criticism dangerous, maybe. But I think I enjoy that as well. I don't know what's next in the critical landscape. I am thinking about a a screen printed, as I said before, publication called Trillion, which is a follow on from Billion journal. But when you're a critic, you're looking at the frame of art. You're not looking at the art object as much, because there's a lot of subjectivity, as we discussed before, embodied in the artwork. So you're looking at the frame to discuss the artwork. So, like, I had a list of things here that could be helpful. You're looking at social media, you're looking at politics, you're looking at ethics, you're looking at labor, the labor of the artist, you're looking at ecology. I heard there's some open submit. Oh no, there's actually a curated show on in Wexford Arts Centre, and the curator is talking about ecology. So that's a really big term at the moment. Gender, economics, class. Class is something that has been disregarded in recent times, because maybe it's intrinsic to being an artist in the world. Institutions, AI, housing. There's been stuff out there recently about housing, especially the way where we find ourselves today in terms of high rents and no spaces for studios, etc. Photography's relationship to the representation of art as a proxy. Archives, really big. I'm even thinking now, of course, about all these things going into an archive in Nival, a kind of mausoleum. But hopefully people will stumble upon this stuff. Technology. So when you describe all these, and I think description is the key here, and it has been throughout all these sessions, when you describe the landscape, whether analytically, politically, or in relation to the formalist stuff of the artwork, when you bring them all together, you get something full. You get something, as the French would say, tout court. I'm trying to learn French at the moment in Duolingo. And interesting, IACA have come up with a residency in Paris, I think, for an international art critic. I know you need lots of professional evidence, which I don't have because I've always been freelance, working on the outside of institutions. I know freelance actually means working with institutions, but really my criticism has always been kind of DIY, so not professional. But it interested me because it's the first time I've seen an IACA open submission having some value. A critic coming from outside, and a critic, an actual critic, not an art writer, not what Temple Bar Gallery and Studios are doing now with art writers, which really was the beginning of the end for art criticism. When I won the VAI and the Lab Award for art criticism, or art writing, I don't know what it was called, but it was really art criticism, one of the first, the inaugural one. I think after that everything started to crash. We got these new awards for art writing, which is basically catalogue writing. It's literature, really. And there's no real opportunities. There's no money either. Artists complain about funding for their practices, but there's no funding for being an art critic. And you get paid nothing for articles. So the scene is barren. We have VAI's newsletter, which really, come on. And then we have paper visual, which is more on the side of literature and art writing. So we have no space anymore for criticism. So maybe this is the beginning. Maybe, perhaps, we can have critics again that really, and critics give a lot to artists. They give all their energy, they take risks in terms of what they're saying about the artwork, because, as said before, the artist doesn't see their own work. They are it's a blind spot for them. And for the art critic to go in and confront the work head on, not parallel. I think there's a lot of risk in that. Okay, I may have a conclusion, but I may end here. I'm going to have another drink, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to get in touch, my email is smallnightzine@gmail.com. Perhaps in the next year something will be released that will be a prototype for new criticism in this age where criticism really doesn't exist anymore, and it seems a perverse activity. Okay, that's it. I will talk to you again.
Recording stop.